going on with this protest. There's so much to unpack. And unfortunately, coming from a place where we've already been making so much progress, informed a lot by post-207, the Waki Commission, the Kriegler Commission, lots of recommendations that gave life to very important bodies, such as the National Police Service Commission, the Independent Policing Oversight Authority, setting the Office of the Inspector General as an independent office within the Constitution that should not be at the beckon or whims and call of, of any office.
Right. Hold that thought, Christine. This is a moving and ever-changing scene that we have to speak to. Back onto Outer Ring Road now. So once the police appear to have pulled back, protesters back on the road in their numbers. You can see a cloud of tear gas smoke behind them. Our team, as I mentioned earlier, are behind the police line. We're not sure how else the police will seek to engage, but a tear gas canister, once again, lobbed at the protesters. This is going to be the scene, like we said, until 6 or beyond, because the protesters not relenting and the police not relenting in their position. And so it will be the running battles, this back and forth between both sides. This was the crowd that had gathered a bit earlier on when the Azimio team had come through Embakasi, more specifically Imara Daima, and then of course down to Mukuru kwa Njenga and Pipeline. At that point, that is where they had to change course. Police had stopped them in their tracks, and they had to find alternative routes. At one point, Eastern Bypass, another Southern Bypass, and eventually to where they reached, which was Ngong Road, the latest update, at least that we could see. Stephen Leto has been following them, but the protesters do not seem to have been affected whatsoever by the tear gas meant to disperse them, keep them at bay. The water cannons now, you can see in the distance, are now being engaged to try and keep the protesters at bay. But they have kept their position right there on the road. Where they will head from here, it is not clear, as the Azimio team has already left that particular area where they were addressing them. But I'm sure you want to say something, Hussein. Go ahead.
I think for me, you're very right. The police and the protesters are engaging each other. There is no, destruction of property or anything of that nature. For me, that's a situation you handle by pulling away the police. What would happen there if the police got into their trucks and left the scene? They'll be left to themselves. That area is their home area. They can't start vandalizing their own businesses, their own homes, and their own everything. So that's a situation where you ask yourself, you just asked, how are the police handling this? For me, why don't you just get into your trucks and leave the scene? There's no politician there. If your issue was the politicians should not engage the crowd, the politicians should not, in one way or another, quote unquote, incite. These are now the community members by themselves, and they're throwing stones and they're coming to the streets to deal with the police. So if you know you're a problem in that place, in that situation, as the police, my question is, what would happen there if the police got into their trucks and left? I don't know. I mean, as Christine said, we've not been given that opportunity to find out. But I can almost say that the situation would calm down. Because then who would the youth be engaging with? They'll be on their own.
But the police
it's not like they're warring parties.
Because they feel that's their mandate.
Yes.
It's not.
It's your mandate if there is, a threat to life, or there's even a possibility of two groups clashing. If we had one group there and the other one, and they're throwing stones at each other or they're attacking it, I would understand. The police have to be there. But here, very clearly, as you can see, they are engaging the police. And, if you are to pull out, I don't know, we can't really tell, but I believe if the police were to pull out of that situation, then there would be calm, and hopefully maybe people would just get back into their homes, go about their businesses, and, call it a day. But, there are security agencies at the end of the day, and we want to believe They have their reasons, they are trained, they understand what is happening. So maybe they know why they are there, and maybe they are there for a good reason, you know. But as I said, it's open to everyone to interpret that situation as police contributing to what we are seeing on our television sets.
Well, some could argue that the police are well within their ambit to try to keep the situation calm. Now, again, this is what we were talking about earlier on, whether this is a chicken versus egg scenario. Was this crowd riled up because of the police presence, or had they challenged that police barricade, which then left the police with no response but to engage in the way they have? It appears a fire has been lit as well to the side of the road, as again the protesters holding to their position on Outer Ring Road. Situation has not de-escalated from what we had seen earlier, but they seem to be giving a message to the police that we are not going anywhere. It is likely these are individuals who call that area home. We can't say that for sure, and so really we have nowhere else to go but to stand their ground here. But we will be following this as well. Gatete Njoroge will be speaking to us a bit later to give us an update. They've been following the situation since early this afternoon, just to ensure they give us minute-by-minute updates on how this unfolds and develops. But in terms of the police action so far, it has been tear gas, it has been the water cannon trucks, as the protesters refuse to relent on their position there on Outer Ring Road. And we'll also be giving you an update on where the Azimio team has reached. It is now exactly 5 p.m. on the dot. I had a question here on Twitter to you, Christine. Someone saying, I beg your pardon, where the president should wait for demonstrators at State House to receive the memorandum. How realistic that is, especially seeing how things could escalate to a point like this?
Well, when I gave that example, I was actually speaking to last Monday. I wasn't speaking to today because we lost that opportunity last Monday. And in using that analogy, what I intended to say was there's a way to deal with this in a more peaceful manner, in a way that actually acknowledges that there will be divergent views, that there will be dissent. And as the president of our nation, he must be open to those divergent views and that dissent, right? And in fact, if the process of picketing, of demonstrating, of protesting is facilitated, the expectation, as provided in law, is that police will then offer security to facilitate the enjoyment of that right, on the one hand. On the other hand, that they then have a responsibility, using their intelligence and working in collaboration with the protesters, to identify criminal elements within those or amongst those protesters and call them out and ensure that they're held accountable. The law goes as far as I said earlier, being very specific. You must not carry stones, you must not carry weapons, you must not. The law is not saying that protests should look like this. This is not the constitutional.
Have an individual who has a stone in
waiting to wield a stone,
sling.
Right?
Yeah.
This is not the protest that the Constitution is speaking to. A peaceful protest is what the Constitution envisages, and it does require that the state security authorities take up their rightful place in ensuring that those demonstrations can be peaceful. In a situation where those demonstrations are peaceful, what is impossible about the president receiving a petition at State House? Nothing, absolutely. Nothing, absolutely, from where I sit, from the kind of democratic society that we want to see. And so my response would be, we must come to a place as a society where divergent views do not lead to death. If I disagree with you, then we talk about political violence. No. And similarly, that divergent views against the state does not result in the state then using state machinery to suppress those divergent views. That is not the democracy that our Constitution anticipated. And so we're speaking out, not because we speak for Azimio la Umoja coalition, but because we speak for the Constitution.
Correct.
And today it will be Azimio, tomorrow it will be us. Speaking out and agitating about one thing or the other. Just 2 weeks ago, we've had a situation in our country where we're debating about sexual minorities. Does that mean that if we go out to the street or to present a petition, we should be tear-gassed? Absolutely not. And so I think the message we're calling out for today is this scenario that we're seeing that has played itself out with these protests undermines our Constitution, undermines our democracy, and undermines us as a people. And we must be able to make an about turn and reflect, recourse, and consolidate the gains that we have made.
Vicky,
yes, go ahead.
Hopefully they've heard our sentiments on Citizen TV, and hopefully the police possibly have withdrawn, and hopefully the youth will now, keep away. At least we don't want, seeing fire on the screen, that's definitely not good. And protesters should be able to restrain themselves from, such kinds of actions, because we don't want to see such things. So far, we've seen, protesters peacefully marching with the elected leaders and, and not engaging in any destruction of property. So when it gets to that level, then now you see, it's getting out of hand, and we cannot condone such kinds of acts, where you're burning stuff in the streets, right. You're destroying property, or you are, armed. That sling could cause a lot of damage, to an individual, possibly even kill someone. So these, and you can see the person just crossing the screen. Again, those kinds of actions cannot be condoned by anyone, and we must condemn them. If you're peaceful, if you are, marching along your leaders, if you're protesting, you have a concern, you need to air out, that's acceptable, and it's your right. It's your constitutional right. But when you start engaging in hooliganism, in vandalism, and related acts of lawlessness, then of course that has to be condemned, and we can't allow that to happen in a democratic society that Kenya is.
Certainly, this is not a crowd that can be left to their own devices.
Well, right now, definitely.
Yeah, and the police, of course, needs to still be present to try and bring some calm. We can see some of the protesters putting stones on the road with the intention of blocking it. I do understand now Stephen Leto is in Karen, where the Azimio leaders have at least rested for a bit. They're going through a briefing right now, and we expect to hear from them shortly. Stephen Leto, if he is ready to speak with us, just to give us an update on their whereabouts and, of course, what that briefing will entail. Stephen?
Well, Victoria, we are already in Karen. I remember the attempt to go to Embakasi East constituency through Utawala was again thwarted by police officers who were stationed at that roundabout. And so the convoy had to take a U-turn back to the southern bypass. And it is there that, also police officers started trailing the convoy, firing tear gas canisters from the rear, and they, trailed the convoy all the way to Karen, and where we are right now, we understand that Raila Odinga, Kalonzo Musyoka, Martha Karua, and other Azimio leaders who are in the convoy are now currently holed up in one of a quick meeting that they are now, they've parked their vehicles here. They're parking. They are assessing the damage that has been done on their vehicles. Some of the vehicles that have had their windows shattered, just trying to see the extent of the damage. And now what they're doing is they are in meeting where they're telling us they will be addressing the media any moment from now after their deliberations in that meeting that they are right now. But we've been able to speak to Kalonzo Musyoka, who has condemned already the incident that the blocking and the use of force by the police, particularly even the attack on the media, and that is what we know so far. But we will wait and hear what they will tell us, what they will be speaking about after this short meeting that they are in currently here in Karen, Victoria.
Thank you, Stephen. We'll cross back over to you once they are ready to make a statement as a result of the briefing. Live pictures. We have not stayed off of this particular picture, this particular scene along Outer Ring Road. The situation escalating by the minute. These are protesters engaging police who have been lobbing tear gas to try and bring, calm to the situation, because we've been seeing of course, some counter activities from the protesters, some with stones in hand, some putting stones along the road to block it, a fire that was lit in the distance there, as you could see earlier. So certainly not a scene that looks peaceful, as had been the intention of the Azimio team, but we are following this situation closely as both groups continue to engage each other. And of course, Stephen Leto was speaking to us earlier on the new developments in Karen now, where the Azimio leaders are meeting following their tour through a protest tour through Embakasi that started around 2 p.m. this afternoon, in fact. So over the last 3 hours, this has been the development and the result of that, where they were a bit earlier on. That crowd gaining a bit of momentum, as you can see, from what it was earlier on. And once again, this can continue, this can sustain throughout the rest of the evening. It is now 9 minutes past 5 p.m. And it looks like the protesters, or at least we assume these are protesters, these also could be individuals who live within the area joining in to watch the melee, that fire also gaining in size and intensity. We hope that no one is harmed as a result of the back and forth between the police and civilians there along Outer Ring Road. No specific active engagement, I should say. They seem to just be milling around and gathering around that fire. Police not lobbing any tear gas as of now, or the water cannons engaged. So again, we'll be monitoring to see if it goes beyond this. But again, this is a clear demonstration of destruction of property happening. We're not sure what was lit and set ablaze there, as you can see, but our team trying to keep safe while also relaying these images, I beg your pardon, to us live. Certainly not an easy job. They have been following this all morning. Police presence has been evident across Nairobi from morning. We saw a contingent of riot police in Mathare, in Kibra earlier on today, and in Kisumu, as well as the anticipated the protests that would take place throughout the day. And so they have at least less than an hour to go. 6 p.m. is the cutoff time that they have been allotted under the Public Order Management Act. And there is a checklist in terms of how this is supposed to be adhered to, Hussein and Christine, when it comes to the Public Order Act. Whether or not this has been followed is another debate, should be put up to question. And this, of course, is meant to guide any further protests or any other civic action, as we're seeing, that will follow. But you know, earlier on you were talking about the exchange of views, Christine, and ideas. This is certainly not what we anticipated. Ideas and views are not being exchanged there.
No.
Instead, it is a heightened situation.
Absolutely.
So how do we move from that to sober discussion, to reasoning?
Yeah. In fact, we do have lessons from our history. we have plenty of lessons from our history. We have had very challenging political moments that have called us from different sides to sit around the table and find solutions, even including about elections and electoral justice and selection of commissioners to the IEBC. We've had variations, many across the years, IPPG, etc., where it took sitting down across the table, airing our different views, and eventually coming to a solution. The 2010 Constitution is a product of almost a decade-long conversation. In between, we witnessed situations such as this, where there were attempts to undermine freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of association, and hence we've come to a point now where we've articulated explicitly in our Constitution what context, how we must deal with our divergent views. And so I would urge as a people that we find a mechanism where we can sit across the table and debate on where we're still missing the mark. Because certainly finding closure to electoral contest is something that we have identified has become a challenge.
Yeah.
Supreme Court determinations were intended to help us to move forward. To some extent, they have, because we have presidents sitting in office after every round of Supreme Court petitions. But unfortunately, the agitation continues, even post the Supreme Court decision. And post-2022, we're dealing with an even more complex situation that is presented by perceptions of lack of independence of significant institutions, where opposition, for instance, speaks or questions the independence of the Supreme Court or the judiciary, where the other side questions the independence of the Independent Electoral Commission body. Well, what do we do as a society when we're faced with these challenges? The only way out is for us to come back and sit around the table. Where it requires us to have legal reforms, let's confront that and do that. Where we need to have constitutional reforms, let's do that. There's already a conversation about minimum constitutional reforms. What do they look like? How can we engage? As the International Commission of Jurists Kenya, and Khalid was speaking earlier, as civil society, we have always been at hand to be part of this conversation. I emphasize again that the people must be involved, the people's voices must be heard on electoral justice, on economic justice, and on good governance, where we do not see state taking responsibility for the excesses, budgetary implications of their actions, appointment of the CASs. All of these are things that are indicators that we're beginning to see a problem, and we certainly must be able to pull back and address that situation. I think I just conclude by saying that we must be clear that the thing that holds us together is our Constitution and the rule of law. Unfortunately, because of our divergent political views, we have dug in, and the way out is to be able to find avenues and solutions through our law and through sober political dialogue around the table. Yep.
I really wonder, we're about to wrap up soon. Hussein, from you, whenever we see, especially it's political science not getting their way under the legal framework of the day, they try to find avenues and ways of changing it to suit them. When will it ever be about the people?
I totally agree with you. And you asked this question